does he do? He might go all the way. He gives it a ride. It's a chance. It'll be a goal. You beauty, buddy. Wants to roll through. He can. Come at the moment. Come at the champion. Yes, he's made it. I don't believe it. I see it, but I don't believe it.
Good evening and welcome to another episode of the Swans Blog, Swans Cast. Tonight, I'm joined by Rohan Connolly. How are you, Rohan?
Yeah, good, thanks.
And I'm also joined by Stephen from Over the Line Sports. How are you, mate?
Yeah, doing well. Nice win on the weekend, on the Friday night, yeah.
Not so much for yourself, Rohan, on the weekend?
No, your timing is impeccably bad from my point of view. I'm an Essendon supporter, so I did that particularly hard. In fact, I can honestly say that's the most gutted I've felt after an Essendon loss since probably the 99 preliminary final. So, yeah, it was a stinker. But, no, full credit to the Swans. So they did really, really well to drag it from nowhere, really, and looking quite ominous. And, look, I guess the upside for me of that is I tipped them to win the flag. So while there's life, there's hope. And I don't know if they're going to be winning the flag, but at least they're a fair chance now of playing in the final. So my ladder's already looking a bit sick, but it might look a bit less sick if the Swans manage to get in there.
Well, what about the Demons?
Yeah, look, they've been super impressive. In fact, I wrote a column today sort of trying to argue why they could potentially win the premiership, and got surprisingly little disagreement, actually, because it's an extraordinary season. I think we all realise that now, but look, I think Melbourne's best this year has been as good as anyone's. The issue for just about every team now is being able to sustain it, but I think every club has their vulnerabilities, I suppose. Whoever wins it, I'm pretty certain it's going to be won by the team that peaks at the right time. We've had one fairy tale last year, and I reckon the Demons winning would be another one. It'd be pretty incredible to get the two longest flag droughts in the league broken in the space of 2 years. So certainly wouldn't begrudge the Demon fans. They've suffered a long time.
Absolutely not. And, if it isn't the Swans up there, it definitely wouldn't be bad to see Melbourne back up there. It'd be the first time since 2000 as well. And over the last 15, 16 years, they've had a pretty rotten run of luck, especially the way that the football has been run on and definitely off the field. So it is really good to see the Melbourne Football Club back, playing good football, but also led well from the top all the way down to the bottom. And the players at least respected on and off the field, as opposed to 6, 7, 8 years ago when it was they're winning 3-4 games a season, and to be honest, it was a little bit of a joke.
Yeah, look, they've certainly had a lot of downs. I mean, they last played finals 2006. Funnily enough, prior to that, they'd actually been one of the more over a period of time, one of the more consistently performed clubs. Like you said, they made the grand final 2000. They were regularly in finals during the 1990s. For quite a deal of time, though, they were up there. But, it really sort of fell apart for them post-2006. And then we had the tanking controversy around 2009, and that set them back. And, they've had various bizarre things happen off the field and, tragedy as well with Jim Steins. Yeah, I think they've been really systematic about rebuilding the whole club, and I can't underestimate Paul Roos's role in that. I think he really brought a lot of stability back to the club in a football sense, and I think Simon Goodwin, who he's a really impressive bloke, Goody. I mean, I've known him a while, and he was effectively an on-field coach in his last few years of playing at Adelaide, and then the Essendon people can't speak highly enough of him. So really shrewd appointment by the Demons, I reckon, to take him on as the assistant and then anoint him as Roos's successor. And I think we're seeing already in year one just how good a coach he's going to be. So, yeah, look, it's great to see. I don't like seeing any club down the bottom of the ladder for too long, and it sort of gives hope to the clubs that are down there at the moment. I think what the Bulldogs did last year and what the Demons are doing now.
Yeah, I agree. And you kind of look in, especially in 2000s, you had teams like Carlton, Richmond and Melbourne who were kind of almost at that laughing stock level of kind of mediocrity. But I think this year in particular, I think you can see something positive or some sort of hope for the future in every club, even teams like Brisbane. This year, I think they've improved on last year and they're starting to develop a really good list. Alex Witherden debuted and was really good off the half-back line, and he looks like another likely type. So, yeah, it's good to see that there aren't really that many kind of laughing-stock teams around at the moment.
Yeah, no, I agree entirely. I think, Brisbane's probably the best example. They're probably still a little bit behind everyone else, but even they've had their good moments this season, a couple of wins and plenty of games where they've been reasonably competitive. And even on the weekend, they ended up getting beaten by a fairly healthy margin, but they didn't completely throw in the towel and won the last quarter. And, you're seeing good young players emerge. Eric Hipwood, he's probably the best example. I mean, he looks like a massive talent, and another good coaching appointment. I think Chris Fagan's the man for the long haul there. A smart guy, good teaching coach, good communicator. I was speaking to Mitch Robinson about Fagan, and he said the players absolutely love him. He's just a great communicator and gives them plenty of feedback, and that's all they want, really. So I think that the feeling up there is as good as it's been for a long time.
And do you think with that senior appointment, there's a bit of a shift away in the AFL from having those players step out, almost immediately from senior football, with maybe just 1 or 2 years in between going into a senior coaching appointment? We saw James Hird, I believe it was within 2 seasons, he was senior coach of Essendon. Voss and Lepic, again, within 2-3 seasons, they were senior coaches at Brisbane. All 3 appointments, it's safe to say that they failed spectacularly, especially up in Brisbane. There was good things that every coach did, but in the end, they all essentially failed in what their primary role was supposed to do.
There's no doubt what you're saying is the case. And if you have a look at the appointments that have been made, I think a couple which really changed a lot of people's thinking were probably Luke Beveridge and Alan Richardson, and tragically no longer with us, but Phil Walsh.
Absolutely, yeah.
Guys who'd been in the coaching system a long time without necessarily big profiles, but and Beveridge too. And I think their success sort of finally convinced clubs that just because you're a star player, it doesn't automatically translate into being a star coach, and that you need a different skill set and you also need plenty of experience. You're dealing with a group of 40-odd people and they all have different personalities, and it's not just having the knowledge about how the game should be played, it's how you impart that knowledge and how you help, teach the sort of systems you want to play by and operate a club by. And, in fact, even going further back than that, I mean, Alistair Clarkson, when he was appointed at Hawthorn, was a really left field appointment. I mean, he'd done time as an assistant at Port Adelaide and St Kilda before that, and he'd coached in the Sandful. But, he was up against guys, Hawthorn greats like Gary Ayres and, Terry Wallace's name was being thrown around, and they went for Clarkson. And I think that sort of might have been the first signs, I think, that clubs were finally beginning to click that, big name doesn't necessarily equal big coach, and that nothing helps a club sort of prosper in terms of membership and support and sponsorship and whatever than success. And you need the best qualified person for the job, not the biggest marketing tool, so.
And you talk about marketability with the coaches themselves. Do you think at times that was the primary motivator for clubs to look at really well-known profile players, or even younger up-and-coming coaches who had that pedigree? Maybe they had the name, maybe they had that career, that playing career that said, I'm a great player, I can be a great coach, maybe I was a captain of a side or something like that. Do you think clubs were looking at that in the late 90s, early 2000s as a way to be able to, as you say, boost a bit of membership? But in the end, for a lot of clubs, it didn't work.
Oh, no doubt. Even earlier than that, I mean, like you go back to 1981 when, the end of 1980, and Ron Barassi left North Melbourne, resigned as North Melbourne coach, and North appointed Malcolm Blight as captain coach. And it was a bit of a disaster, and Blighty ended up resigning the job 16 games into his first season. And, of course, later came back and proved that he was a fantastic coach, but he wasn't ready at that stage. And I think, more recently, I think the examples people cite are James Hird and Michael Voss. And, who knows, the end of this year or later, they might end up citing Nathan Buckley as well. But, yeah, it's hard to... It's not that simple to judge a coaching performance. And I've always thought with James Hird, obviously the supplements thing was a spectacular disaster. It's probably the biggest disaster a coach has ever been responsible for. But, if you're talking about actual performance, I mean, Hird got Essendon into the finals in his first season in charge. They were looking okay the second year and then got a truckload of injuries. The third year, they qualified for the finals but were thrown out. Then he was suspended for a year, and then 2015 was a disaster. But, you look back on his actual coaching record and you think, well, was it that bad? Vossy, Voss's bottom of the barrel moment for him, I think, was they made finals in his first year as coach, and I think he overestimated what he had at his disposal, and they went out on that very ill-judged recruiting spree and, picked up Brendan Favola and who else? Raf Clark, Andrew Rains, Eamon Buchanan. There's another one there that's not coming to mind, but, they overestimated how good they were and sort of sold their future for the here and now, and it didn't work, and that set them back years.
And those
so that was his...
were mostly towards the end of their career anyway, or basically... Their career ended within a year or two of being there.
Yeah. Well, recruiting and list management is probably, I think, probably the most important thing that dictates a team's success now. Or that and coaching appointments, I'd say. But, and that's, I know this is a Swans podcast, but I think Sydney has probably been better at that than anyone else. I mean, even Hawthorn now are paying a price to an extent for bringing in ready-made players and giving up draft choices to do it. Now, I'm not saying for a moment that was wrong because they won 3 flags in a row out of it. So if I was a supporter, I'd be pretty happy with that. But I think no one's done it better than Sydney in terms of remaining competitive but being able to plan for the future as well. And, you have a look at their 2012 premiership side was one that had changed significantly from when Roosy was coaching them, and then it changed again by a bit coming up to 2014. And then you have a look at their side now, the side that got to the grand final last year, and that was significantly different again from 2014. And just to be able to keep those young players coming through and refreshing the players around them, while at the same time, picking up guys from other clubs who can really give you some help. It's a real juggling act. You've got a lot of different balls in the air in terms of not only the sorts of players you're recruiting, but both your immediate success and long-term success, and it's really difficult to get it exactly right. And I think that's another sort of weight that a coach has to bear as well. And I think John Longmire's done that as well as anyone, to be honest.
Now, did you get a chance to read Paul Roos' latest piece where he talked about the coaching transition plan that he had with Sydney and Melbourne and how it's reaped benefits at both clubs? And so basically he said that clubs should have a progression plan in place where, because he's a self-declared non-career coach, he doesn't want to be that sort of coach where so many coaches do want to be that kind of coach. You got Nathan Buckley, who's going to want to be a career coach unless something, drastic happens. And so many coaches these days want to be in the caper for as long as they can, whether or not it's in a senior position or an assistant position, or even just working with development players and reserve teams. And I think he's absolutely correct in what he said, was that because teams don't have a transition in place of one coach to another, and Collingwood tried it with Buckley and Malthouse, but that failed spectacularly, that some clubs are simply not set up for when the coaches change. So catastrophe and the sky falls in and everything happens, and Collingwood's a really good example of what can happen when there isn't enough put in place for that transition.
Yeah, well, the benefits of doing it are pretty obvious, that you've got a guy who is going to be taking over the reins, and he's already there, and he can assess and work with the players he'll have at his disposal. But as you said rightly, that it's 99 out of 100 coaches are going to want to be coaching for as long as they possibly can. So how are you actually going to be able to identify one who's happy to say, okay, well, I'll coach for, 3 years, and then after that 3-year period, this guy's going to take over from me? And we saw the obvious problem with that at Collingwood, because, and I could really see it from Mick Malthouse's point of view too, that he reluctantly agreed to this succession plan, and then when it was time for it to be enacted, he was taking a team into a second grand final in a row with a chance of winning back-to-back premierships. And I think a lot of people would have had the same feeling. It's sort of like, well, hang on, I'm coaching as well as I've ever coached. My team could win back-to-back flags, and I've got to step down. And it was
fix it.
It was pretty unfair on Nathan Buckley too in that regard, to the point where Bucks, and he said this in a fairly memorable SEN interview he did last year. He went to the Collingwood administration and said, look, if you want me to hold off, I will. But they felt like they were locked into it. So, yeah, look, it's a difficult thing to engineer, and you've got to have a coach, an incumbent coach who's quite happy to put a expiry date on his tenure, and I think that's going to be unlikely. Many people will do that, but if you can find one who's prepared to do that, I think that's definitely a favourable scenario, and it's certainly worked beautifully with Roosy, first with handing over to Horse, and then again, it appears to be working beautifully now, handing over to Goodwin.
Yeah, great. And it looks like, just looking from a Swans perspective, it looks like there's a few kind of good assistant coaches there coming through the ranks, particularly Stewie Dew. I'm not sure if you had much to do with him, Rohan, but I've always, whenever there's been a potential opening for a new coach for a new team, his name's always thrown around. So he must be someone who's quite well rated by the footy community. And yeah, I mean, as you say, it's to have that kind of preparation in place. I can see him coaching the Swans at some point in the future. And yeah, that kind of preparation and getting to know the structure of the club and the players at your disposal, it's really a good benefit for the club.
Oh, for sure. No, look, Stewie, I haven't had a heap to do with him, but I've interviewed him enough times on radio, and he gets very good raps from the people who work with him. Fairly tactically astute, and look, the other guys Longmire's got around him have all been in the system a fair while now too. I mean, John Blakey, for me, sort of stands out as the most obvious one. He's been doing that gig a long time now, and at Brisbane as well. Some of them just tend to sort of creep through, and you don't hear a lot about them, but then you think, hang on, they've been doing that gig a fair while. And, Brett Kirk's now worked at 2 clubs, and Henry Playfair's an interesting one because he was a fringe player at Geelong, but he's done that role now for a while, and Josh Franco, of course, as well. So look, I think the attitudes to what constitutes a potential coach have changed a fair bit, and that probably gives a lot of assistants hope who 10 years ago probably wouldn't have thought, because of their lack of profile, they probably thought, oh look, I've no chance really of ever getting a senior gig.
Hopefully we don't lose our coaches anytime soon, because we need them. And we've all seen what happens, especially especially at Fremantle last year. They had a bit of a disaster season with their coaching, and that's not to lay blame on the players who came straight out of retirement into coaching. I think there was potentially some support issues around there where maybe there wasn't enough done in the background to be able to support those players and those personalities coming into the club to help them, in a way, get up to speed or get them educated with the game plan or whatnot. Because I do remember Ross Lyon round, would have been 5 or 6 last year, basically laid the blame at their feet and said, I stepped back, I hands off, I left it all to my assistants and bang, you're all at fault, stop me.
Yeah, well, I think a bit of that in their case was also that, I mean, this is my understanding, that they did try to embrace a sort of change in game style and a slightly more attacking, aggressive game style. And I guess almost a consequence of the rigidity of Ross's game plan, that the players actually went to him in the end and said, we can't cope with this, we're too sort of set in our ways, and they sort of went back to playing the way they were. But I think they've done that a bit better this year, although it sort of seems like every time they make a bit of headway and get a few wins up, they sort of revert back to type, like they're too scared to persist with it. But I have noticed a bit more flexibility about the way they play, and look, I'm sure the assistants have a fair bit to do with that.
There's great conversation on football and coaching in general. We've got heroes and villains of the week. So, Rohan, would you like to kick us off with your hero of the week?
Hero of the week? Ooh, it depends what your criteria is. But look, right off the top of my head, I'd probably say someone like Robbie Gray for Port Adelaide. I did that Port Adelaide Collingwood game for the Age on Saturday, and it's one of the best individual games I've seen for a long time. He kicked 5-1, I think. He was involved in 5 score assists. And he's just such a clever player. There's nothing particularly remarkable looking about him, but he's got great nous, I think. Great reflexes. And he kicked 1 goal straight from the centre bounce, which was just a beautiful bit of vision, I guess, to spot sort of where the opportunity was going to be, and almost tapped the ball to himself rather than take it, and then gathered it and snapped over his shoulder. And he gives them great flexibility as well, because he can play an elite level either as a midfielder or, as he's done this year, primarily as a forward. So him doing that is allowing Chad Wingard to play in the midfield a bit more, and they've both become very, very valuable assets for Ken Hinkley. And look, Port were really impressive in that game, but I just thought that Gray was so far ahead of everyone else as the best player on the ground, and almost still doesn't get enough kudos, I don't think. There's a lot of really good players of his size and stature, but he tends to get sort of left behind a bit in the discussion of the elite. But, he's just an absolute superstar, I reckon. So, look, he'd be my nomination for this week.
And Stephen, what about yourself?
Mine doesn't go to a single player, but it goes to the kids of the Dockers. Going down to the Cattery, and without Nat 5, without Sanderlands, you'd kind of expect them to lose by 10 goals plus, but they went down right to the final siren, and they had 2 debutants, Sean Darcy, who had a ripper of a game. I think he had something like 30 or 40 hitouts, and very much held his own against Blissarves and Stanley. And you got the young players like Blakely, who's becoming a real talent in the midfield, and Darcy Tucker, who had 3 goals as well. And for a rebuilding period, and for Ross Lyon, who it could be argued doesn't have much experience with really rebuilding a team, it looks like they're on the right track for that sort of rebuilding process, and you can see the new core of players coming up.
Absolutely. Now, for my hero of the week, I'm going to stick to the Swans just because. Yep. My hero of the week is the one and only Ginger Ninja, Gary Rohan.
Hey.
He's a bit of an interesting player because he has so much ability that every time he goes near the ball, you just think, oh yeah, he's got this. But sometimes he might, sometimes he doesn't. But he was in the right place at the right time on Friday night, and the last 2 weeks he's done it. He nailed one against the Tigers when we desperately needed it, and he's done it again on the goal line on Friday night. So it's absolutely amazing to see that from a player who has struggled over his career to get some consistency and get some good games strung together. So to be able to see him do that on Friday night was absolutely fantastic. And I know you're an Essendon supporter, Rohan. This isn't to rub it in, but if Goddard had done the same thing, you'd be like, yeah, Goddard. But
No, absolutely. No, right. Look, he was in the right place at the right time. Of course, if Goddard hadn't done what he did do, we wouldn't be having this discussion, would we?
Well, I am going to kick off the villains of the week, and it is none other than Goddard. Now, I did my player reviews and also did my match reviews on Friday night, and I'm sorry about this one, Ron, but I actually had Goddard in our best. He he did not have a good game at all. He gave up a goal in the first quarter, or second quarter, and the funny thing was he turned around to start abusing someone, but it was his own turnover. Then he did some okay things throughout the match, but then that last kick out that got smothered, and then he had that really sort of lazy effort trying to smother Rampy, and when you need probably one of your most senior or the most senior player in a team to stand up and lead, he's got a track record of just sort of wilting away and disappearing. So he's my villain of the week. What about you, Rohan?
That's a fair old bake you gave BJ. Look, he didn't have a great game. I reckon he cops a bit of a rough deal sometimes. I think people sort of read a bit too much into some of his theatrics on the ground. It's probably the right call in this case. I don't know, this might be a bit left field. It's certainly off field, but I've got to say I'm getting increasingly tired of the, how would you call it, self-indulgence of certain TV commentators or certain TV commentary crews who I'm talking, well, look, I'll cut to the chase. I guess I'm talking about Channel 7 on Friday nights. I just, there was the roaming with BT stuff where he cracked the sads about not being able to speak to whoever he wanted whenever he wanted, and apparently he was given access to quite a few Sydney players, so I think he sort of soaked it up a bit too much there. But just their commentary generally, I don't know why there's this obsession about constantly talking to each other. Like someone will call a passage of play and someone will go, oh, a great call, Bruce, or, hey, Wingy, blah, blah, blah. And it's sort of like almost sort of excluding the viewer at times, or it's sort of like we're supposed to be absolutely enthralled by what they think about each other. And I've got to say, I really absolutely can't emphasise enough how little I care about that. And I think if you go back and listen to commentary 10, 20 years ago, there was none of that. I don't know where this has come from. It's sort of like this, I don't actually blame the commentators totally, because I think that there's voices from above saying to them, oh, boys, we've got to not just appeal to the footy heads, we've got to appeal to the casual viewer. So we've got to, make things funny and entertaining and controversial and whatever. But I still reckon you can do that without talking about yourselves every bloody 30 seconds. So it's a bit of a hobby horse of mine, but I thought during that game last Friday night it sort of seemed to go to another level again. So I have got to say I've done my share of bagging of footy on TV over the years, which is probably why I've had very few TV gigs. But I can only say what I think, and that's they're my villains. I'd certainly like to see a lot less self-indulgent TV commentary.
Yeah, I mean, surely that's what the AFL footy show is for on a Thursday night. I mean, we don't need to during the game.
No, they're pretty big on the self-indulgence. That's true.
Yeah. Just on that, I didn't write a blog piece earlier today, but I did do a discussion piece on one of the forums, specifically about the points that you raised about how the commentators just seem to be having a conversation amongst each other than actually calling the game. And if you go back to I sort of suggested that the real starting point of this was when Channel 9 got the rights all those years ago. And it was basically the Triple M crew, the Melbourne Triple M crew gone on to Channel 9. Because that was who was leading the charge. You had James Brayshaw, you had Gary Lyon, Sam Newman doing occasional special comments. I can't remember who else. I can't remember if Dennis Cometti or Dwayne Russell was on at the time. But they were going
Dwayne was. Dwayne, Dennis was with them. Eddie calling as well.
That's right. And they were going up against Channel 10. And they made Channel 10 look like a beacon of society. It was basically just watching football and listening to a bunch of yobbos chat football, in a pub. And I think it's kind of carried on over the years where Channel 7's kind of disintegrated into that way where they've gone, oh, this is what people want. People want this kind of buddying up, conversational calling. And the same things happen in cricket. And I remember maybe last year there was a bit of an article that came out where one of the players was told that they should be more controversial in some of the comments that they make. I think it was Michael Clark who was talking about this. So it's a bit like, do we want to hear about what Wayne Carey's doing on the weekend, or do we actually care about the player who just kicked the ball? So,
yeah, well, it's funny with Warney because when, it has happened with the cricket, and when Warney's talking about a spinner and his technique and stuff like that, it's riveting viewing, like his observations are great, but then within 5 seconds he's descended into talking about what sort of pizza he's going to order from room service or something,
or his gambling.
Yeah. Or his hair.
I think a lot of people find that difficult to deal with. And, the issue with the footy, of course, is that I think the TV execs get sort of deluded into thinking people love it because the ratings are good. Well, the ratings are good because they've got a captive audience. There's nowhere else they can watch it. If there were two networks both covering the game and competing against each other, I reckon you'd see a fairly strong switch towards the one which, was sort of trying less gimmickry and, just concentrating on the actual game. And that's a theme that I hear a lot now from people, and just being involved with the Mungrook footy show this year, I've noticed it like times 10 that people seem to love Mungrook, and the reason they love it is they said, well, they just talk about the footy and they respect the game, and you can tell that they love the game and they're interested in the game. It's not always about, it's not ever really about themselves. So, I've felt that for a long time, and increasingly I feel like a lot of other people feel the same way.
Oh, look, I've got to be honest, I haven't watched the AFL footy show in about 15 years, and I utterly refuse to watch it.
I probably haven't watched it for as long. I mean, I watched it, like a lot of people, I ended up watching it last week because I was watching the State of Origin game, and it just happened to come on afterwards, and it's really the first time I've sat there and watched it for many, many years. But, I sort of wasn't overly surprised at what I saw.
Well, Stephen, who is your villain of the week?
My villain of the week is villain times 2. 2 things he did this week which kind of gave him cause to be a villain. That's Clayton Oliver.
Oh, yes.
Now, diving's a thing for soccer. Leave it to them. Don't bring it into our game, please. Yeah, Clayton Oliver gets a nudge from, who was it, Schofield of the Eagles?
Yeah, Schofield. He got suspended for it too, by the way.
He did, 2 weeks down to 1 he got, which is another issue altogether. But
that's a disgrace.
Looking at this kind of incident, especially over the slow motion, it just seems like he gets nudged a bit. There's a pause where eternity in the universe stands still, and then he collapses like David toppling Goliath. It's ridiculous. And one of my favourite cricketers, Damien Martin, absolute legend, played for his country, big contributor in Ashes wins, made a comment on Twitter, and Clayton decided to snap back. Now, he brought up a particular shot that Martin played, I think it was in 1994. Now, Clayton, you weren't even born then, mate.
It's 23 years.
Show a bit of respect, come on. I mean, it's all good to have a sledge and a bit of banter and stuff, but I think taking it to a Australian cricket legend is a little bit too far for me.
Look, I'm surprised he didn't dredge up old replays of Don Bradman going for his duck when he needed 4 runs.
Yeah, absolute spud he was.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think we've got some good heroes and villains there.
So, Rohan, you've been journalist with The Age for 30 years, massive stint in the industry. You're now taking a voluntary redundancy, I hear, and going to be leaving them. So my first kind of question of this kind of segment is, what's the future hold for you? You're going to be still with SEN and Marngrook. Are there any other kind of plans for you for the future?
Yeah, look, I mean, things could change, but what I'm certainly planning to do, and actually in the process of doing right at the moment, is setting up my own website. So it's a bit of a gamble. I mean, it's funny. Well, I mean, one of the reasons I guess I'm leaving Fairfax is that media companies or newspapers are struggling to make enough money out of digital media, and that's sort of lies at the heart of why newspapers have the problems they do these days. But I'm quite sort of hopeful that I can establish a bit of a niche. And look, I've been at The Age for 30 years. I was at the the Sun News Pictorial, which is now the Herald Sun, for 5 years before that. So it's a fair time, I guess, writing what other people want you to write. Although having said that, I mean, that's a bit unfair because for a long time I've pretty much been able to write what I want to write. But there's stuff that I'd like to write about that isn't always going to be sort of flavour of the month in a newspaper, and I'm talking about things like history and stuff like that. I mean, I'm a real nut about footy history. You know, I'm a bit of a train spotter with, you know, facts and figures, and I love the old grand finals and finals, and, you know, I sort of pride myself on recalling them. And, first grand final I ever went to was 1973, and I haven't missed one since, you know. So, I mean, footy, I can't sort of overstate how big a role football plays in my life. And I love the history and the old stories and, memories of the old days, really. So, and I've always thought that there's a market for that sort of stuff. So, you know, that's one thing I want to write about on my own site. But look, basically in the immediate term, I'm just going to be setting it up as a publishing platform for basically a lot of the same stuff I write now. So, you know, I'm planning to do, a weekly sort of review of the round and concentrate on a couple of key issues out of each weekend of footy. I want to keep doing match reports, you know, sort of maybe pick a game of the round and do a match report on that. And that's another interesting one. There's a lot of people in newspapers now who think, match reports are dead, you know, because everyone watches it on TV. They know what's happened. But I think that misses the point a bit. I think that, and I know as a supporter, I felt like this, that if your team wins a game and, you know, you're pretty happy with it, I love reading about how the game unfolded and how my team won, you know, and I think if you write them entertainingly enough, people read them. So I'm going to keep doing that. And look, I'll do some preview stuff. I've been doing a Facebook Live Q&A session every week for the last couple of years, which has proved pretty popular. So I want to do some multimedia stuff on this site as well, maybe a bit of video. Hopefully at some stage revive the show that myself and Mark Fine from SEN were doing last year called Footyology. So that's what the website's going to be called as well. And really, look, I'll just sort of start with that as a template and see how it develops, and I'll be guided, I think, by what sort of feedback I get from people and whether they like it or not, you know. And I'm actually, it's funny, I was doing my last blog today for The Age, and, the response from people was quite overwhelming, but, you know, one of the messages that keeps coming through is people love the interaction, you know, and being able to have a discussion with someone or, you know, debate a point with someone about something they've written or said or whatever. So I really want to get that sort of stuff happening. That's what's great about social media too, which I probably spend far too much time on. But, all those sort of things I want to incorporate into this website and see how it goes and hopefully, down the track get some advertising for it and hopefully get a sustainable source of income from it. But, yeah, look, I'm doing a fair bit of radio and I'm doing a little bit of TV. So between those three things, hopefully myself and my family won't be starving anytime soon.
Yeah, well, that's a dream, isn't it? And with the talk about especially your outreach, especially on social media, I know that there's the talk that print journalism and football media is undergoing either a revolution or its downfall, depending on who you ask. But I think that with the social media, and it's something that you do so well, and what I really kind of admire you for, it gives you the opportunity to really reach out to your audience. And I think if you don't kind of take advantage of that, then you are going to see that sort of I don't know, degeneration of kind of fading away, or as your audience, as your readership kind of move on and expects these new ways of interaction and analysis. So, yeah, good on you for doing that.
It's funny because I was going to say, it's a bit of a generational thing, but I'm not sure it always is. I'm 52, so I'm hardly a spring chicken, and there's plenty of people around my age group who love social media, but there are plenty that avoid it like the plague as well. And I sort of understand that because you do, it can get pretty feral, and look, I'm probably not the greatest at dealing with that, to be honest. I mean, I have a crack back at a lot of people that have a crack at me, and
I noticed.
People constantly say to me, you should just ignore them and don't feed the trolls and all that sort of stuff. And I do, I do that sometimes, but sometimes, I don't know, sometimes when people just say something that's completely idiotic or completely abusive, I just feel this strange compulsion to give them a clip around the ears in a social media sense. So I don't know, I'm a bit sort of hard on my sleeve like that, I suppose. But, you can have a bit of fun with it too. And it depends what you tweet about. I mean, I said right from the start when I got on Twitter, which was, a bit over 5 years ago, but I said, look, I'm not just going to use this as a thing to link to my stories and whatever. I'm going to have my 2 bobs worth, and I'm not just interested in footy, I'm interested in plenty of other sport, and I love music. I'm a big music fan, so I like tweeting lots of my favourite music clips and annoying the hell out of people with that. And I'm sort of pretty interested in politics too. It's actually the political stuff that tends to get me into the most trouble because that's probably the thing people get angriest about. So there are certain political commentators in this country that I keep sort of having ongoing wars with and debates and whatever you like. But, look, it's, at the end of the day, if it's causing you too much grief, you just switch off and go and do something else for a while. But it does have a certain addictive quality to it. But I do, look, I love the interaction, and that's why I've enjoyed blogging and enjoy doing the Facebook stuff and enjoy Twitter, because you just, you're dealing with real people, and it gives you a good feeling too about how people are thinking, I reckon. I reckon that's one problem with journalism and journalists in the modern era. It's probably always been a problem, actually, now I think about it, that, sometimes they get a little bit, what's the phrase I'm looking for? They sort of like sit in ivory towers, it's sort of like they pontificate about something and then won't accept any sort of alternative view or any debate about what they're saying. And I sort of think, if you sort of have an opinion about something, you've got to be able to defend it in a debating sense. Otherwise, it's not worth much. So I quite enjoy that. Intellectual? Oh, actually, sometimes it's not so intellectual, but I quite enjoy those exchanges. And look, in that sense, I guess one thing that I think has helped me a bit being a footy writer is why I came to it, and look, don't get me wrong. I mean, I've got a strong journalistic background. My father was a career journalist, and that's how I became interested in it. But he was also a career sports lover as well, and I sort of married the two things. But, you know, when you grow up going to a footy game every week and standing in the outer and doing all those things that, you know, run-of-the-mill fans do, you sort of empathise with them a bit more and you sort of see it from their perspective. So I'd like to think I've got a pretty good rapport with the average punter out there, you know, and that in some ways I'm sort of just speaking on behalf of fans. I certainly feel that in terms of, you know, the sorts of issues that fans come across a fair bit, like, you know, ticket prices and, you know, grand final ticketing and food prices, access, you know, noise blaring out of the scoreboard, all those sort of things. You know, there's a lot of journos that never worry about that because they're sitting in a comfy press box all the time, and I do too these days, but I've never sort of forgotten, you know, what it's like to be a punter at the footy. I can tell you it's a lot easier than it used to be. You know, like when I was a kid going to all the suburban grounds around Melbourne and, you know, going to the toilet and standing ankle deep in urine and, you know, sort of going to Victoria Park and Western Oval and some bikie threatening to punch your head in when you're about 15 years old. And, yeah, I got some tales of complete horror from going to those sorts of grounds when I was a kid.
I had a similar threat like that when I was at the Richmond Swans game at the MCG. I had a couple of those sort of moments, but yeah, so it's good to see it's not died out completely.
No, the Richmond supporters have always been pretty feral. When I was a kid, they used to have the Richmond Grog Squad, and they were pretty intimidating. I actually spent a couple of years in the Essendon cheer squad when I was in my mid-teens, and that was interesting. But yeah, look, I've mellowed a bit. There's some fairly infamous stories about some of my behaviour in press boxes even over the years too, but I like to think I've matured a bit in the last, at least the last 20 years.
Yeah, we all have to grow up sometime.
So, off the back of last week's Footy Classified episode, with Nathan Buckley criticising the doorstop nature of football journalism, and more recently, Brian Taylor making a mountain out of a molehill at the end of the Swans Essendon clash, do you think that there's enough access to players and coaches these days for journalists and media?
It's an interesting question. It's not necessarily an easy one to answer. Because I see arguments both ways. Look, it was I can say from a newspaper perspective, it was certainly easier to get access to players, you know, 20, 30 years ago. I mean, no club had media departments, and if you wanted to interview a player, you basically rang up the football manager and he'd say yes or no, but, you know, 9 times out of 10 he'd say yes, and he'd just give you the player's phone number, you know, and you'd do it, you'd organise it yourself and do it yourself. And now clubs have media departments that I think sometimes get a bit too heavy-handed about how they divide their media duties. So, you know, like just as an example, you know, I find it a lot harder now to do player profiles because, you know, you'll pick out a player who you think might make an interesting piece and you ring the club and they say, oh, well, he did a couple of interviews on radio last week, so we're giving him a break. You know, what about in 6 weeks' time or something? And then the whole reason for doing it might be lost by then. You know, you're doing it because that guy's sort of newsworthy at that time. The difficulty for them is that there's so much more coverage now. You know, I mean, when I started, it's quite phenomenal, really, how the numbers have increased. You know, when I started, there was a VFL Media Association, and it was basically, I don't think the electronic media was even part of it. You know, there was basically 30-odd footy journos covering the VFL, and it was a pretty small band, and, you know, the media duties of the players weren't that all-consuming, but now there's, you know, it's quite ridiculous. I mean, I'm absolutely certain there's more accredited AFL media than there are AFL players. So I appreciate that they get a lot more requests now than they used to, so that wouldn't be easy to deal with from their perspective. But, yeah, I do think sometimes they're a bit too paranoid about controlling the message and, you know, they worry a bit too much about, oh, you know, what's this guy going to say, or we don't want to give ammunition to other clubs and da-da-da-da-da. And I think that's a bit overdone. Like, I really don't think that things like that play a huge role in how sides or players perform. So it has got harder. But I think by and large the clubs do the best they can to make players accessible. It's sort of the circumstances in which they do it. So, I mean, if you go and cover a game and you go into the rooms after the game, you know, they'll always sort of put half a dozen players up and you can speak to any one of a number of, 6, 7, 8 players. But it's really quick, you don't get more than 5 minutes with these guys. And if you work for a newspaper particularly, what I sort of like doing the most and tended to do pretty regularly was, sort of longer interviews where you sit down with a guy for, I don't know, 3/4 of an hour sometimes, and build up a bit of a rapport during the interview so they relax and they're not just giving you cliches, and you can get some real honesty from them about, or, just interesting stuff about beyond the obvious, beyond how their most recent game was or what their form's like, when they get to open up about their life outside of footy, for instance. And I had a good example of that just last weekend. I did a story on Paddy Ryder about his 200th game, and I actually didn't speak to Paddy for the interview because, he's not, without wanting to be rude, he's not a great talker. So instead I spoke to Brendan Wade, who is an assistant coach at Port and Paddy's ruck coach, and I also spoke to a guy, Paul Vandenberg, who's the head of their Indigenous programs, and Port do a lot of that stuff, and he's got a very good relationship with Paddy, and when Paddy was suspended last year, they went out to these, really remote Aboriginal settlements and did a lot of community work out that, and Paddy really thrived on it. And just talking to him about that, I think made for really interesting stories. So the opportunities to do those sorts of things are a lot more limited now, and that's a bit frustrating. Getting back to Nathan Buckley's point about the doorstops, it's probably something newspapers don't do that much. It's more sort of the thing for TV news crews because they need the vision of someone. You can't just ring them up and talk to them on the phone. But I have a lot of sympathy for the players and the clubs in those cases because they're caught on the hop and, they're not really sure sort of what they should be saying or what they shouldn't be saying. And I reckon the bulk of the time you don't really get much of any value from the people involved. But then again, I can see it from the TV perspective as well. They've got to try and get something. So it's sort of it's a bit of a tug of war between the two competing agendas. But so look, overall, I'd say access is more difficult, but I don't think it's shocking, and people talk about American sports and how open they are, but I'm not sure they always. I don't follow American sports closely, but people always talk about what it's like in Super Bowl week, and you can talk to all the players. Well, yeah, that's Super Bowl week, but what about the rest of the season? And the EPL. I mean, I like my soccer, and from what I can gather, and just speaking to journos who have covered the EPL or seen European soccer, the access to players over there is far more restricted than ours is. So, yeah,
it's literally just after the game, pretty much.
Yeah, well, from what I gather, I mean, like if you watch the EPL highlights, you never see interviews with a player, do you? You see the manager spoken to for about 30 seconds immediately after a game for the host broadcaster. And my view on this is about halfway. I reckon the situation I'd like to see sits about halfway between what Bucks was saying the other night and, halfway between that and what Craig Hutchison was saying, his point of view.
No, that's a very good point. And just something you said before about American sports, with baseball, journalists and media personalities have access to players before and after the game. Do you think that is something that could be done in AFL, or do you have any sort of ideas of something else that could be done to provide more access for print and TV media?
I think like I said, I think after the game it already happens. Before the game's a bit more difficult, but it does happen. I think we're seeing more of that now. I know, working for SEN, I've done a few pre-game interviews with players in the rooms, when they've allowed that, and we see a little bit of that on TV. I'm not sure how much you get out of anyone before a game. They're obviously pretty preoccupied and a bit cagey about stuff. So I'd probably like to see more access during the week. I think match day isn't so big an issue, but I think during the week, I guess I'd like to see. I'd like to see media departments maybe a bit more savvy about what different media organisations are after, and look, the better ones are. It's funny. I mean, a lot of the media managers initially, when they started coming into the game, were sort of former journos, and they sort of had a pretty good idea of who was who and what different types of journos were chasing. I think the longer time's gone on, people go straight into those roles without a journalistic background, and they don't necessarily have that same empathy or really draw much of a difference between various media people. Like for instance, I mean, if I'm not saying I'm anything special, but like if I want to interview a player, it's because I think he's got a good story to tell, or what he's doing in his footy world is of interest, rather than I want to get him to say that my coach is no good or something like that. I don't reckon I've ever been much of an ambulance chaser in that regard. So you'd like to think that the person you're dealing with from the club can sort of say, okay, well, I know that this guy's going to approach it this way, and I know that this person's going to approach it another way. I reckon there could be a bit more of that, and that might make it a bit easier.
Yeah, fair enough. And you said earlier that it's kind of a tug of war between the clubs and the image they want to present, and the journalists who kind of, want to get the next scoop and the next headline sort of thing to kind of hook in their readership. And I do agree with that. And in the centre of this tug of war is the players. And I do kind of feel for them in terms of what they feel they can say, what they have to say, what they want to say. And that kind of brings me on to my next point. What I want to talk to you about is the players' own use of social media. So talking in particular about Tom Bugg and Jack Watts, their Instagram picture aimed at Joe Hannison of the Bulldogs, and Clayton Oliver's use of social media about tweeting to Damien Martin, and just kind of that idea of being entertaining and the mental side of what can happen in the game versus the club's image and social media policy and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, look, I think the clubs get too overly paranoid about it, to be honest. And again, that comes back to wanting to control the message all the time. And I think often, the irony is I think often the players are more than happy to do the media stuff and more than happy to engage with people on social media, but they're sort of scared off it by the various managers at the clubs. And funnily enough, as it's got harder to access players through the normal channels, I mentioned before I'm pretty frequent user of social media. I found that I've been able to sort of strike up pretty decent relationships with a variety of players through social media. And it's not, don't get me wrong, I'm not sort of mining them for information or whatever. It's just like, you're interested in footy and work in footy. They play footy and they're interested in footy. And, I wouldn't like to say who the players are because they probably cop it from their clubs. But, I often have, regular exchanges either through public tweets or direct messaging or whatever with a number of players just about the footy. And it's, it's no different to two guys in a pub having a chat about the footy because they're both interested in it. And I really appreciate that. And it sort of convinces me that a lot of these guys are mature enough to handle it properly. And, look, for what it's worth, I thought that whole thing about the Thomas Bugg thing was, it was really overdone a bit. I didn't see what the problem was. It's not like posed for an Instagram pic and said, we're going to smash this guy's head in, did they? They just said, look out. Well, of course he's, God, if he can't cope with that, seriously, I mean, you're playing at that level. I think you can handle something like that, can't you? And the Clayton Oliver thing, well, yeah, I mean, you made him a villain, didn't you? And probably fair enough from one perspective, although I've always been dirty on Damien Martin for getting out to that shot in that test in against South Africa in 1994, so I sort of didn't blame him. But
I don't go for that.
but look, I think it's fun, a lot of it. Patrick Dangerfield, he's arguably the highest profile player in the game now, and he uses social media more frequently than any other player I can think of, and he's great at it, and he's a great guy, Paddy. He's very intelligent and very affable, and if anyone's on Twitter and they're listening to this, follow him. His tweets are great, and he's got a lot to say, and he's interested in other stuff, and I reckon it sort of enables you to see more of a player's personality, and I reckon that has to be a really good thing, not something to be discouraged.
Yeah, and another kind of, I know, and I think this is what Craig Hutchinson was saying, was that the more the clubs kind of try and restrict and pull back on what the players can say, the more that the media side of things, particularly some particular circles of the media, not necessarily print media that I'm thinking of, the more they try and go to more extreme means to try and get that scoop.
Yeah, well, sort of like if there's it depends how you want to approach, I guess you call it crisis management, but if a player's involved in a controversial incident, on or off the field, if I was running a club's media department, I'd be more inclined to get them to face the music as soon as possible, because the more you sort of hide them away and the more they don't say anything, the harder the media is going to try to compete to be the first one to get some words from them, and the more we're all going to have to endure phrases like, so-and-so breaks his silence. Like, how many times do you read that on newspaper websites these days over the most trivial stuff, I'm trying to think of a really stupid example, and I can't off the top of my head, but, so there's some sort of minor controversy and someone doesn't speak about it for a few days, and then when they finally do, it's, Joe Bloggs breaks his silence. Well, if you get the person out there and answer a few questions straight away, there's no silence to break, is there? And they're not hassled for the next, 72 hours or whatever it is until they say something. So, I don't know, sometimes I think clubs make it harder for themselves in how they deal with those things.
Yeah, agreed. So moving on to the next kind of talking point, the AFL and the Players Association, they recently agreed to a huge total player payments, TPP deal, with the players receiving an average 20% pay rise across the board, as well as a raft of career improvements and options, such as free agency for life, removing the restriction on Category A rookies playing senior football, improved flight conditions, I think some business class flights for East-West transport in particular, and many others. And I was just wondering, what impact do you see the new TPP deal making on the competition, particularly on in regards to player trades and list management?
It's really hard to tell, but you'd think given the trend of the last 7 or 8 years that it'll probably increase player movement between clubs. I mean, it's obviously going to, if guys become free agents for life, well, it has to, doesn't it? Because there's fewer restrictions on them leaving. I've got my concerns about that. I mean, I do, I'm worried about the extent to which that might sort of subvert the whole draft system. I mean, what's the point in having a draft if a guy can get drafted by a club and then rack off after 1 year and go somewhere else? And I think, what we've had of the free agency thus far, I don't think it's really had the impact it was supposed to. I mean, it was initially, my understanding is it was sort of brought in for a couple of reasons. One, to prevent the players from eventually taking legal action about restraint of trade, which, the whole draft thing really was. I mean, there's always been a sort of tacit understanding between administrators and players that they wouldn't challenge that, because if they did, it would just be a minefield, So I like the concept of the draft and the salary cap. I think there's absolutely no doubt they've been the major things in the equalisation of the competition, which is a great thing. I have some sympathy for players' workplace rights, if you like, but I'd hate to see us get back to the situation that prevailed pre-draft, so say early to mid-'80s, where you had like Collingwood and Richmond indulged in this sort of 3-4 year long trade war where they were just constantly pinching each other's players, and all that happened was both clubs ended up nearly going broke, and I also think that you've got to be careful that if you are a supporter of the club, you can be reasonably confident that the bulk of your players are going to be long-term players for your club. I'd hate to see us get to a situation like, say, the Premier League, where, if a player stays at a club longer than, 5 years, let alone a whole career, it's a bit of a rarity. I don't like that at all. I mean, obviously the club's bigger than the players, but I think young supporters particularly identify with particular players, and if they're moving around every 2 seconds, I think it makes it harder for people to form an emotional attachment to those players, and in turn, perhaps an emotional attachment to the club. So that aspect of it worries me. In terms of the amount of money they're getting, well, I don't reckon they can have too many complaints now. If the average playing wage now is going to be about $370,000, they're going all right. And if even the lowest paid player in the league stands to make, I did see the figure, it's escaping me for the moment, but I think it was about 180 or something. So yeah, look, they train hard and they work hard, and they've got the skill to get to an elite level. But that's pretty good coin, I think, for a relatively inexperienced professional in any job. So I reckon after this agreement, they haven't got too much to complain about, and I don't think they will. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see how the sort of loosening of restrictions on player movement, what impact that has in terms of free agency and trades. And that's the other impact free agency's had on trades too. I think almost by implication, I think, once experienced players started moving around via free agency, I think a whole lot more players sort of thought, well, if this guy can go, well, why shouldn't I explore my options? And that's up the ante in terms of numbers of players who are traded now. So, I'd hope that the AFL sort of keeps tabs on it, and if we're heading down a path where every second player is changing clubs every 5 minutes, that we're able to revisit it and perhaps do something about it. But it's going to be very hard to. It's like the whole draft itself. It's something that it's really difficult to assess until a long time down the track. So we talk about, did this club draft better than that club? Well, you probably can't tell till 5 or 6 years have elapsed after that particular draft, and I think it might be the same with this collective bargaining agreement.
Absolutely. And that follows into the next question that I want to ask. And there's been a lot written about this season in particular and the evenness of this season, and just it's one of the closest and fiercest contested seasons in recent history, certainly AFL, VFL history. And, at the moment there's 6 teams vying for top 8 just in this round alone. There's 3 games that separate, I think it's 15th or 16th and 3rd on the ladder, which is basically unprecedented because at this time of the year, there's usually 5, 6, even 7 games separating the bottom 4 with the top 4.
Yeah.
Now, how much of the evenness would you say is attributed to things like equalisation, or do you think it's more the players and the clubs and the coaches who have evolved more in improving the list that they have, but also the way that they coach to being able to coach to their strengths while also negating other teams' strengths themselves?
That's a good question. Look, I think, from a big picture point of view, like I said before, I think the draft and the salary cap's been absolutely crucial. I mean, there was, I got a bit testy with a few people in footy a year or so ago who were saying, we need draft assistants to the bottom clubs. They're not rising up the ladder quickly enough. And I just think that's absolute bullshit, and they've got short memories if they think that. If you go back to the 80s, I'll give you this figure, between 1967 and 1983, so 17 seasons, only 4 clubs won premierships, and they were Richmond, Carlton, North Melbourne and Hawthorn. And then post-AFL, so 1990 onwards, we've had 27 premierships and 12 clubs have won premierships. So basically a different club has won a flag on average about once every 2 years. And if you take out Gold Coast and GWS, so you talk about the 16 clubs that have been there a while, the only one of those clubs that hasn't played in the grand final in the AFL era is Richmond. So everyone's had a chance at some stage, and those numbers for me speak for themselves, that there is a much closer gap between the best and the worst. That's not all of it. I think part of it also is what we were talking about before, right at the top, about coaches and stuff. I think clubs are getting smarter and more professional about A, coaching appointments, and B, list management, and C, recruiting. They've always been reasonably close in terms of fitness and things like that. Resources can make a bit of a difference, some clubs have better resources than others, but I think that's probably the gap between the best and worst there is probably narrowed as well. So the differences between the best and the worst in every conceivable aspect are a lot less than they used to be, I think. If you went back to when I started covering footy in the mid-1980s, like some of the horror stories, and it wasn't necessarily always their fault either, but, some clubs were run like suburban, backyard suburban operations, and whilst other clubs were totally professional, and there was an enormous gap. That just doesn't exist now. So, all those differences have been narrowed, and I think the cumulative effect of that is you end up with an incredibly even competition in which even the lower clubs are not without a chance, not only from week to week, but from year to year. I'm having a look at the ladder right now in front of me, and Brisbane's on the bottom. Well, their prospects are probably brighter than they've been for at least the last, 6 or 7 years. And if a side as good as North Melbourne is second last on the ladder, that's just ridiculous. The Roos, they've lost, they've won 4 games. They've lost 4 games by single-figure margins. They're a pretty capable team. In fact, I doubt that we've ever seen a team as capable as North that low on the ladder before. Probably early this season when Sydney and Hawthorn were bottom 2, which was ridiculous. So, the ladder speaks for itself, I reckon, and I think that's a great thing, and that, again, as much as I love soccer, I seem to keep bagging it here, but, if you follow the EPL, until Leicester City won the title season before last, unless you barrack for Man U or Man City or Arsenal or Chelsea, you're not going to see your side ever win the title, and that would be a horrible feeling to have. I love the way that AFL footy gives fans of every club some hope.
Absolutely, and there's such a contrast in the two sports, not only just at an international level, but the way that those sports are run nationally. With England, they don't have a salary cap. They don't even have a concept of that. They've tried to bring in FFP, financial fair play, but that was pretty much laughed out of the league about 4 years ago. And that was to try and bring in an equalisation of, you must, as a club, make enough revenue to cover how much you spend. And clubs and their owners, they worked out ways around that where they just give interest-free loans where they would never have to pay it back, or they have to pay back some minuscule amount that was never ever going to be repaid, things like that. So you're absolutely right. Unless you supported those 4 clubs, and maybe Everton about 5 years ago and Tottenham more recently, your objectives per season was basically, let's finish outside of relegation, let's finish top 10, let's finish in that 8th to 12th, 13th and get more money. Let's try and finish top 7 to get those UEFA Cup spots, that sort of thing. And one thing, you mentioned Brisbane and North Melbourne, and the one thing I really wanted to touch on was I want to get your thoughts on how the clubs are run at the times immediately after success. So we had North Melbourne, who had a very good run in the 90s. They played they played 4 grand finals. They won 2 premierships. They played, I think it was 7 preliminary finals in a row. It was absolutely nuts just how good they were in the 90s. Then they basically at the start of the 2000s, and by about 2003, they were almost irrelevant. I remember after that prelim loss to Port Adelaide, where they got absolutely thrashed, they were a basket case for a while after that. And then you look at Brisbane. Brisbane is another excellent example where they won 3 premierships in a row. They made a 4th grand final, and then within 2 years, they were almost cap in hand, help us out. From a casual punter looking from the outside in, you don't really get too much of a perspective of what's actually happening and what drives those clubs into that situation. But what do you think was actually happening at the clubs at those times?
Well, I think they're 2 pretty different examples for various reasons. Okay, I'll take North Melbourne first. So you're right, it was 7 preliminary finals between, 94 to 2000, 94 to 2000, 7 preliminaries in a row, 2 flags, 3 grand finals. But even then, they were a club that had a lot of financial difficulty, and they've always struggled for supporters as well. So that's been a bit of an issue for them. Even then, they had enormous financial difficulties to the point where in 96 they were trying to merge with Fitzroy.
That's right, yeah.
And their supporters backed that, really, and it was thwarted at the AFL Commission table and by the clubs, actually, because they were worried about how strong they'd be, and the Commission wanted Fitzroy packed off to Brisbane, which ended up happening. But that was something instigated by North, purely on the basis of their financial issues and wanting the money that was on offer for clubs that would have a merger, which I'm trying to remember at the time. I think it was $6 million they were offering, which doesn't sound like much now, but, back then, even 20 years ago, it was a considerable amount of money for them. So they had the most dilapidated facilities in the competition, like Arden Street. It was a bit of a standing joke about how bad their facilities were, tiny little, rooms and not much of a gym or weights room or anything to speak of.
Well, it wasn't until the mid-2000s when they actually got that revamp. And their facilities now, I don't know how they are right now, but when they got the revamp done, the facilities were pretty good.
They're great. I mean, they're as good as they've been. They've actually just started talking about a proposal or announced an improvement to those facilities again. Yeah, well, the irony there is that only happened because they almost got shunted off to the Gold Coast. And I got quite caught up in that argument. That was back in 2007. And again, they were in danger of being shunted up to the Gold Coast because they had enormous debt and they couldn't get enough support, by either membership or corporate support. And the fans, to their credit, fought long and hard to keep them here, and then they managed to get, government on side and some decent financial backing, government mainly though, and they redeveloped Arden Street, and they I think got a bit more proactive about doing that deal for home games in Hobart, and they're never going to be a powerhouse club financially. They're always going to be a bit of a niche club, but there's certainly no concern about that future now. But I mean, the point I'm making is that, back then it was possible. And Hawthorn's probably an even better example. I mean, Hawthorn played in every grand final from 83 to 89 and won in 91. They won, 5 flags between 83 and 91. And yet by 1996, they were seeking a merger because they were broke and they were struggling for membership. So, it's taken in those cases a couple of crisis situations for clubs to really find the antidote, I guess, to those problems. Now, Brisbane's situation's a bit different because it's in a non-traditional football environment, and I think what they found was that, everyone was on board while the going was good, but it wasn't necessarily a hardcore following, and they jumped off pretty quick. And one of the things that did happen with Brisbane during that run of 3 flags in a row, they, I think, by choice, I think they stuck with essentially the same group of players, didn't really push much young talent through. So when a lot of those players got older and retired, there wasn't a lot left to fall back on. And you had that, so their performances downturned pretty quickly. That in turn drove the fans and members away. And because they were in a pretty sort of apathetic environment anyway, in terms of support from the media or government or whatever, corporate support, it made life pretty hard for them. And they've really, in some ways, never really got over that. So different situations, but they both show you that how precarious, life as an AFL club can be. I think things are a bit more secure now than they were even 10 years ago with North. I mean, you haven't heard suggestions about any club relocating for a long time, which I think is great, and hopefully you won't again, because, I think we all just want to focus on the actual footy and not sort of the survival or potential extinction of any club. So I'm glad those days are behind us.
Absolutely. And with the amount of money that the AFL is injecting in the league and sustaining the clubs, you'd certainly expect, clubs that have been in the AFL and the VFL for a very long time and have a storied history to at least be financially kept where they are. And North Melbourne, like if we go back to the early 2000s, when they were struggling, they were selling home games in Canberra, they were selling home games in Sydney. I believe, did they play one up on the Gold Coast at one point?
Yeah, I think they did at Carrara. Yeah, against St Kilda. I went to that, actually. It was 2008.
And that was when they were doing the Southport Sharks.
Yeah, there was a period there from the late 90s to 2007 where they were calling themselves the Kangaroos. They actually sort of ditched the North Melbourne name, and I always thought that was a mistake, and they've since gone back to North Melbourne. I think it's really important to have some sort of geographic identification with an area, and it's not, they've just always been a club that's struggled for a big supporter base, and circumstances have changed. So if they got on a roll now and won a few flags in a row, maybe that would happen. But, North Melbourne traditionally wasn't an area where there was a lot of, it sort of wasn't a densely populated area. There's a lot of sort of small business and factories and industries there. So it was sort of a funny area for a footy club to be. Didn't have a lot of support historically, and history's sort of shown that the clubs that had the biggest support bases initially have maintained them, really, and Hawthorn's probably the exception to the rule. But like I said, it took the threat of their near virtual extinction via a merger to rally what supporters there were to get them on board. So, yeah, it's funny how the environment in which the clubs operate has changed. But I think now it's probably, right at the moment, it's probably as stable as it's ever been.
Speaking of stable clubs, let's have a look at the match on the weekend against Essendon. I'll kick it off with you, Rohan, if you just have a couple of quick thoughts you want to give us about the game.
Oh, look, I thought it was a cracking game. I think Sydney dominated most of it, and inaccuracy was nearly very costly for them. I think Essendon, by contrast, Essendon really dominated that last quarter, but then, for a number of reasons which have been pretty well documented since, made it some pretty fatal errors and allowed Sydney back in, which is, again, a testament to Sydney's spirit, I suppose, that they still sort of thought themselves a chance, even when, it looked like they probably weren't. But I thought, in terms of the play, the balance of play, I think it was a game Sydney really dominated. Look, their form's really good. I think. I mean, they've won, 7 out of 8 now, haven't they? Or 6 out of 7. And the other one was, a 4-point loss. So, look, I just think things have clicked for them. I think it's been pretty pivotal getting the likes of, well, Kennedy's played well all year, but just getting Hanbury and Parker contributing a bit more. I think Jake Lloyd's been outstanding for them. I think Heaney, once he came back, made a big difference. I mean, the guys missing from that side early in the season were hugely important in terms of their structure. You know, both Heaney, Rampy, another one, even Tom Papley. I think his importance is a bit underestimated. So I think he's been critical to them. You know, Buddy, I think Buddy's always a threat. I reckon he's been pretty good again. They just seem to have a bit of stability, and I think some of the younger guys have really shown a lot too. You know, I really like the look of Nick Newman, Haywood. I think Haywood's probably been the pick of those younger guys, but you know, Hewitt, Towers. You know, I think they've all Florent. I like the look of Florent as well. You know, so they've all shown a bit, and I think as those young guys get more used to what's required of them and gelling with those more senior blokes, you're going to see their performance continue to improve. So, yeah, I thought it was a pretty solid effort by them. And look, Essendon's been in pretty reasonable form, you know, for the last month. So I thought it was quite a high standard game. I mean, there were plenty of errors, but a lot of that was forced by pressure. And, yeah, it was a good hit out for both of them, really. And, you know, fortunately for the Swans, they ended up in front after the siren.
And Stephen, what would you say about the game?
Yeah, it was a real skin of our teeth performance, wasn't it? I will admit, when I was watching the game, I was at a pub in Melbourne surrounded by Bombers fans. So some of it is a bit of a haze for me. But I do remember the way Essendon play. I kind of imagined the first quarter would be them really pushing the attack, and it would depend on how well we kind of contained their attack and running play through the midfield. And then eventually we'd try and kind of overwhelm them throughout the rest of the game as they tired out, because I think that Essendon's kind of style of play it's exciting and it's great to see, but I don't think they've got it quite sustainable enough over the 4 quarters. And to be honest, with that in mind, I was actually pleasantly/unpleasantly surprised on how well they did. Part of it was Swans' inaccurate kicking in front of goal, which almost kind of brought us down. But yeah, I mean, Essendon stuck to their guns and they were getting the important marks when they needed them. And look, I think we're very lucky to kind of get the win in the end. I think key points, kind of key moments where we got that forward pressure and we didn't allow them to get that rebound out of defence, that kind of pressure which we're really known for. And Tom Papley is a key player in that regard. His pressure inside the forward 50 is just remarkable, and he's got a bit more midfield time this year. It's basically turned into a Benny McGlynn clone, which is just wonderful to see, yeah.
And look, just to touch on some of the points that you made, you know, we won the game despite the fact that Sam Reid and Lance Franklin combined for 1 goal 9 between them. So you're just looking at the stats. It's still mind-blowing to see that. And then you look at the disposal efficiency that Franklin had. It wasn't even 30%. It was, you look at the stats and you go, wow, okay, he had a pretty poor game. But the influence in that last 5 minutes to really just get in there, desperation, try and drag the team over his line. It was him, it was Kennedy, it was Newman, it was Papley, it was Heaney, it was Kennedy, it was everyone, and Mills. It was just everyone combining together to do their absolute best and to just absolutely storm and put the pressure on. And, you know, all credit's got to go to Essendon for their performance pretty much from halfway through the third quarter to the last 5 minutes of the match, where they had a run-on of 7 goals. And it looked like Sydney couldn't even stop them at one point. It looked like it was just a one-way street, you know, players jogging and Essendon sprinting with the ball straight down the other end of the field. McDonald,
and then,
Woody.
sorry, just one.
Yep,
yeah,
jump in.
Joey Danaher almost having his own Leo Barry U-Star moment.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. That's just another instance of Bruce McAvaney and BT just having a bit of buddy comedy, you know. Oh, he's taking a mark, and then one of them chips in, Leo Barry, and it's like, it's not Leo Barry.
And I want to pitch in there with, you mentioned Buddy in that, how important he was in the last 5 minutes. In the last quarter, Buddy had 7 disposals, 5 contested, 3 marks, 2 of which were contested. And for Buddy, that's pretty impressive. He's not really exactly elite in his marking. 3 tackles, 3 inside 50s, 5 score involvements, and 5 pressure acts. So he stood up so much in that last quarter.
It's funny with Buddy. I mean, he's got a history of ripping Essendon apart. Certainly with Hawthorn, and I reckon until the last 10 minutes, they would have been very happy with the job they'd done on him. But no, you're quite right. I mean, he was absolutely pivotal in those last 5 minutes, and that's how good a player he is. I mean, you can, even when he's not having a great day, you can never sort of presume you've got him beaten, because he's capable just of, some players when they have a bad day, that, okay, they're done. They're not going to fire back. But Buddy is quite the reverse. He can be completely subdued and then just burst onto the scene and turn a game. And those players are so valuable, and that's why he's still one of the most valuable, handful of players in the competition.
And he had most of those disposals in the last 8 to 10 minutes of the match. All 5 score involvements were the last 5 scores by the Swans. So he had 2 marks, he had all of those inside 50s, the Newman goal, the Florent goal. The Florent goal was his kick in that spilled over the back. He had the 2 points, and then he had the kick that went out of bounds. Oh no, sorry, Papley smothered it, but he was involved in that one anyway. So it was really incredible just how much he influenced that contest right at the end of the game. And you can look at some of the mistakes that Essendon made, and I think, to be honest, I think too much has been made of the, inverted quotes, the mistakes that Essendon have made. They're looking at a back play when you got Hurley chipping backwards instead of going long. In hindsight, he probably should have just gone long towards the boundary. You've got Danaher kicking long to Mills and Tipperwingi. But if McDonald Tipperwingi wins that, the game's over. All he has to do is turn, run, and bang it long.
Yeah.
It's a 50-50. You go into a 50-50. In the last moments, you're either going to the boundary or a 50-50. So I think the criticism on what Essendon did was a bit much. Goddard, in hindsight, probably shouldn't have done what he did. But again, sometimes you get away with it, sometimes you don't. So, and the one thing that really surprised me from the Swan side was Isaac Heaney was the highest rated Swan player on the ground. And he had the least amount of disposals of the top 7 Swans players on the ground. He had 21 disposals. And I was a bit surprised by that until I looked at the tackle column. He had 9 tackles and 2 goals, 3 clearances and 5 marks. He had a bunch of clangers and his disposal efficiency wasn't great, but his influence in that first half, outstanding. And he got stuck in that last quarter as well. So... And, Josh Kennedy doing the work to drag him over the line. The last 2 clearances, before the last goal of the game, there was one in Essendon's back pocket where he just sharked it and just ran, I think, 15 metres and banged it. And then there was another one out of the centre after we kicked the goal. He just grabbed it, ran 15 metres and banged it in again. Then there was a kick in the pocket where he banged it in and we scored again. So just the work that he did was absolutely incredible.
Yeah, he's a Kennedy. In fact, someone today on our blog asked me who I thought the most underrated player going around was, and I'm almost tempted to say Kennedy because there's so many midfielders, and it's not that he doesn't get much kudos, but I'm not sure he gets enough. His influence, he's one of the most consistent players I think I've ever seen. He just so rarely puts in a quiet game, and even when the Swans were really struggling early this year, I thought he was the one guy who was consistent for them. And an absolute bull. He's such a strong-bodied player. And to be able to have that strong body and do that clearance, can win that amount of contested ball, but still rack up the sorts of numbers you probably associate more with a more lightly framed player, those high 30 disposals. He's just a fantastic player, and wow, what a great player he's been for Sydney. He'll end up, when his career ends, he'll end up being one of the very best players in their history, I reckon.
Agreed.
Yeah, absolutely. And even now, he's making a pretty good name of himself as a captain. So it's that that 0-6 start is looking, a fair way in the mirror. So you never know. You never know what the season can bring. And last year it was the Dogs winning from 7th. So this year it could be the Swans winning from 17th. That's where they started their season essentially. So,
well,
yeah.
no sides ever made finals after being 0-6. So that already, if they make it, they'll create some sort of history. But yeah, look, absolutely. If they manage to make the 8, I wouldn't. No way would I put a flag beyond them, because I think they've got valuable experience in that environment that some of the other contenders don't. GWS still haven't got a heap of it. Not many of the Adelaide players have much experience in finals, or not nearly as much. The Bulldogs have had a taste, but 1 year's worth, and you might have Melbourne up there, they're new to it. A lot of those Richmond guys are new to it. So, there's a reliability about the Swans, particularly now they've got back to this sort of form that's more typical of last year, that I think makes them absolutely dangerous for a tilt of bigger things if they get into the 8.
I think the only thing that's going to stop them is injuries, because depth is definitely an issue. And that's what happens when you have senior players move on, retirement, trades, etc., so forth.
Trade bans.
Yeah, and look, the depth that we've got is we've got Dawson, who's played 1 game. He's now being moulded in a Kennedy-type midfielder. We've got Sean Edwards, we picked up as a rookie. We got Dan Robinson. We've got a couple of other players in the reserves. We've got Brandon Jack, who, to be honest, he never gets played in the position he actually plays well in the reserves. Jared McVeigh, who, you kind of have to keep him together with sticky tape and Band-Aids just to get him back out on the field, such as his legs at the moment, which is really unfortunate. So it's a matter of, where do we actually fit some of these players in? But at the same time, what actually happens when we start having those injuries and we go back to where we were, 3-4 rounds into the season, when we had Jordan Foote, we had Dawson, we had Malikan, we had unfit Aaliyah, we had Kieran Jack on, one leg with his hip busted, we had Brandon Jack, we had Florent, we had Hayward, and we had no rocks, so...
Yeah, I agree. I mean, looking at the list of who played in the reserves this week, we've got Jared McVeigh, who'll come back. His leadership is a underrated quality, I think, and him coming back when we were struggling earlier in the year, I think was a catalyst in our kind of rebound back to form. In terms of our defence, we've got Jeremy Laidler, who I think is one of those classic guys who plays his role and plays it well. Harry Marsh also, who can come in all right. Talia, not sure what's happening with him, but I imagine he has the ability to come in and pitch in if needed. So, yeah, I think up forward is where we're kind of missing out if we do kind of suffer any injuries. We've got guys like Roos, who had a good debut, but hasn't really taken the bull by the horns that much since then. We've got Brandon Jack, who, as you said, doesn't really thrive that much as a kind of small medium forward. So... And then we've got also another guy who I like quite a bit, Toby Pink, who acts as kind of like a third tall forward, kind of like a Tom Lynch from Adelaide almost, but he's still a few years away from being able to contribute to the in a senior level. But yeah, I mean, what was said before about the Swans having that experience in a finals atmosphere, it's credit to our list management, I think, because we came into this season with the 4th youngest list in the comp. So, look, yeah, if we do keep it together, if we keep the best 22 or 25 type players on the park, then, yeah, I think anything can happen. But with this season in particular, I mean, what's it been? There's been, 16 games decided by between 1 to 3 points, which is absolutely ridiculous. So anything can happen, I reckon.
Well, that's more than have been decided. More than have been decided by that margin since, I think, back to 2007, and there's still 90 games left, I think.
Yeah, 1993, yeah.
Yeah, so it's it's amazing. It's an incredible season, and well, just fingers crossed the second half of it or the last third of it's as good as the first bit's been, because it's been bloody absolutely gripping.
Because I just quietly give up on my footy tipping.
I gave up on that after about round 3. I think the one thing you can say about this year is if you're leading your tipping competition, you know nothing about football.
Yeah, that's true. Well, if we have a look at the next round, it's got that almost air of closeness, or the complete opposite, where it could just be a group of blowout games. We've got the Demons and Swans, which we're going to talk about next, and that's on Friday night. That could easily go down to the wire. Then we've got the Dogs hosting the Eagles. Now that's like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. You don't know what you're going to get with the Eagles. They can either turn up, which is pretty unlikely, or it could just be a Dogs thrashing. Then you've got Carlton and Adelaide. We've got Gold Coast and North Melbourne. That's going to be an interesting game. And the big one, you've got the Giants and Cats. That's top of the ladder. Then we've got Port Adelaide and Richmond. So these are all close ones, and that's just on Saturday. You got Essendon and Brisbane. I would expect Essendon to win that one, but you never know, because Brisbane have done some upsets, and they have played pretty well at times. Hawthorn and Collingwood's going to be a good one to watch. And just to cap it all off, you got Fremantle and St Kilda, and that most definitely is going to be a close one. So I think those close games are going to continue this weekend.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's, the pattern of this year's been, there's been probably minimum of 2 upsets around. Yeah, there's a couple that you think on the face of it look pretty clear cut, but what is clear cut this season? It's I don't see. I'm trying to think of the most I've tipped. I think I got 7 one round, but that's about it. Even during the split rounds when there were 6 games, I was getting 2s and 3s. So I'm probably the last person you should be asking. I think you're probably better off discussing that yourselves.
And so, Stephen, let's have a bit of a chat about the Melbourne and Swans game. That's the most important game of the weekend for us. Now, it's a big game for both clubs because Sydney is just sitting outside the top 8, and Melbourne, they're sitting just outside the top 4. They want to get in the top 4. We want to get in the top 8. So, if we just have a quick look at what's actually happening with the Melbourne club at the moment, they've got Jack Viney, who's got a shoulder complaint. Jack Watts, he's out. Salem's out. They're talking about Jesse Hogan might be available. So, the midfield depth for Melbourne, and not to mention Nathan Jones is still out injured. So their midfield depth has been, it has been hurt. They don't have those players in there that they used to have, or they had 3 weeks ago. So if I'm looking at it, I go, yes, because it's going to make the midfielder's job a bit easier. They don't have to worry about so many rotations. Do you think it's going to be a bit easier for us with those injuries and those players out?
Yeah, well, it's certainly a huge advantage for us. They've got Max Gawn back in their ruck, which does help them a lot. You never wish injury on a player, but I did kind of wish he would wait a couple of weeks before returning. But yeah, so Salem being out is really important. I think he's really stepped up in terms of that outside distribution and run, and he can be quite a deadly player on his day. I know I've heard that Jeff Garlett's out as well, and as a small forward, he can be really dangerous, and I'm sure Nick Smith will be happy to hear that. And Hogan, I've heard kind of conflicting reports whether he'll be back or not. There's a slight chance, I'll call it 50-50 at this stage, but I kind of get the feeling that if he is back, I don't think he'll be playing it 100%. It'll be a big risk for them if they do. And yeah, Nathan Jones, in terms of his inside grunt and what he offers to the team in terms of leadership, is a huge out. So, and we get Zach Jones back, Nathan's younger brother, and it'll be great to see him back. And Jared McVeigh, he will return. He played in the Niafl team. He made his Niafl debut.
First game in 10 years, I think it was. Maybe more than that. But he had in 3 quarters he had 19 disposals, 3 marks, 7 tackles, and 2 goals too. So he played with a fair bit of dominance and sat out the last quarter and did everything the coaching staff wanted him to do. So he should be right to slot straight back in.
other than that, I don't think there'll be too many changes. We've won 6 of our last 7 or 7 of our last 8, so, don't change something that isn't broken too much, even though some of those wins have been super close. And especially with Melbourne too, I mean, it's Melbourne and Swans who I think are the two informed teams of the competition, so it really should be an interesting game. And we probably, looking at those injuries, we should be slightly confident for a win. Our form in Melbourne's been pretty good this year as well, but at this point, really, it's like our final season starts now. We just really can only afford to probably lose about 2, 3, 4 games for the rest of the year if we want to make finals and make a fist of it. So, yeah, look, every game's an important game for us, but yeah, it should be another cracker, I reckon.
And if we talk about McVeigh and Jones, there's also the other player that we need to talk about, and that's Lewis Melican, and he could be replaced by Harry Marsh to combat the smaller, more mobile, quicker forwards that Melbourne are going to try and play against us. We're talking players like maybe Pedersen or something like that who might play up forward because they don't have Watts. They may have Hogan, but I think that's just a bit of smoke and mirrors. So even if you played, you'd have Rampy or Grundy against him. I don't think that's going to be a problem. He might kick 1 or 2 goals, but he's going to be kept. But then they're also going to push Gawn deep quite often, pretty much as they can to get that one out. So
Thomas Boulder kicked 5 goals last week, and
exactly.
Winner, so he is no small threat.
Oh, he's no small threat at all. But it's going to be who is the better matchup, and I would expect Rampy to go to him. So you then look at your second and third options, and that's why I think talk of Jesse Hogan coming back in as a bit smoke and mirrors to try and call a bit of a bluff to maybe force the Swans into a change. And so I'm thinking maybe Melican's an option that could come out for Marsh or even Aaliyah if he's fit. Then
or Laidler.
Or even Laidler, yes, completely depending on who Melbourne have fit. Then you're looking at who comes in or who makes way for Jones. Pretty much Dean Towers, perhaps, as long as Jones plays more of a sort of midfield wing kind of role. The other option is Florent, but even then, his performance last week was far improved from anything that he's played earlier in the season. So maybe even George Stewart could be an option. So the team itself is really, really settled, and it's going to be really hard for, even though McVeigh might be available, I think it's still going to be really hard for McVeigh to get in. And the two obvious ones that would come out is basically Florent and Towers for those two players.
Yeah, agreed.
And you could even lightly suggest someone like Will Hayward could come out for maybe someone like Dawson if they need more of midfield / high half forward running. Give Hayward that bit of a break.
Yeah.
Because he's looked in and out of games, and I think physically he's not really there. He's not far off, but he's not really there. But also stamina-wise, it's a long season. Mills looked jaded by the end of it, and when he came back from that injury last year, he was, kaput pretty much. So
yeah,
matchups, and yeah, Melbourne did really well in their last win, but I think this is going to be a completely different game for them, and Jack Viney is going to be hobbled a bit. He's still a good player. There's no question about that whatsoever. And Petrarca, and there's a bunch of other players that can run through their midfield who are very good players.
David Hunt.
Yeah, exactly. But I think by missing Jones, they're kind of missing that inside-out player who can transition well for them. And we have the players who can chop them down and who can go head-to-head and beat them. So while I look at Viney as one of the better ball-winning, potentially contested players in a league and just his hardness, I think we still have better players in our team. So
yeah, I always looked at Viney as kind of like the next coming of Josh Kennedy, and he's Josh Kennedy. I think is just a class above, and if those two go head to head, I'd probably pick Kennedy to win probably 8 times out of 10.
Yeah. Oh, look, he's bigger, but he's more consistent. He knows where to go. Mm-hmm. And that's not like a knock on Viney, because Viney's
no.
I'd take him any day of the week in our team. I mean, if it meant giving up someone for him, hell yeah, we'll take him. But I think the most impressive thing that's happened for our side are the lesser lights have actually, risen to the top. Hayward and Florent have had, decent enough seasons, but you can look at players like Papley, second season, he's come back from injury and he's been absolutely phenomenal the last month.
He's been Yeah, agreed.
Oh, and Lloyd, best season yet. He's been top 2, top 3 for the Swans every single week. So at the moment, he's probably leading the best and fairest. Callum Mills is right back up there at his best, and even surpassing what he was doing last season, especially in the last quarter against Essendon. He was superb. Nick Newman has brought in just this fresh air off the halfback flank. And that was probably the biggest worry that we had at the start of the season, was who's actually going to bring the ball out. And every time I watch Jake Lloyd kick it out, I'm kind of shivering, scared, like, oh, God, where's it going now? Zach Jones, not too worried about. Rampy, not worried about at all. So, personally, I'm kind of hoping that there's a kick-out kind of change there, but having someone like Newman on the back flank and his tackling has been superb. Oh, it's good to watch.
Yeah, definitely. And I've been saying for a few years we need a good Nick Malcheski replacement.
Yeah.
And I think Newman fits that to a T, I think.
Absolutely.
Especially how he can pop up and attack and kick an important goal here or there too.
Oh, an important goal or two, there's no question about that. I'll tell you what, he might not be able to mark it, but he can certainly bring the ball down the ground. He did it against Richmond in the win, and he did it against Essendon, so... he has been superb. And I just love the way he sort of kicks a goal, just jogs, rolling the head, no worries. Get back to our positions, do that again. just another day at the office. No problem here. And look, there has been a bit of debate on social media, but also Big Footy, around good old Iron Fists. If you know who I'm talking about.
Oh, I heard that nickname once or twice before, but you're going to have to remind me, mate.
Callum Sinclair.
Oh, yep.
Now, the Callum Sinclair Tippett debate has been raging. And look, there's no way Tippett's getting into the side this week because he was injured last week. And the guy needs like 3 games in a row to get fit.
Mm.
But the way that he has come into the team and made a contribution when he's had that pressure on has been fantastic. It's been phenomenal. Especially last year when he was so maligned and people, and myself included, didn't want him near the side. And he wasn't fit. He had that interview, I think, in the preseason last year when he came back from when he came over from the Eagles. It was him and someone else that both said that the fitness level that the Swans do was far beyond anything that they do at the Eagles. That within the first couple of training sessions, he was cramping and he was exhausted and he couldn't even keep up with what the Swans players are doing. And it was so evident when we were playing. I mean, he was cramping at the end of the third quarter. And I remember him playing against, I think it was Carlton, and he was cramping like 3-4 minutes into the last quarter doing stretches in the back pocket. And in the full pocket. I'm watching that thinking, Jesus Christ, is this player fit?
Yeah. But yeah, I've been pleased with what he's done this year. I mean, I imagine that second kind of pre-season with us has done him wonders. And that combination of Sinclair and Naismith, look, it hasn't been too bad for us, I think.
Oh, it's been fantastic. And look, the other player that I think has been absolutely massive for us and structurally has straightened us up superbly, and it was the one thing that we desperately needed, was Sam Reid getting back into some form, some level of form. He has been like a breath of fresh air in a team that just at one point couldn't score unless Tippett and Franklin were on. So he's kicked a couple of bags, and again, like I said earlier, between him and Franklin, it was 1 goal 9. And, we're talking about it on Big Footy today, for example, can't kick straight, the game plan's this, the game plan's that, the coaching's this, the coaching's that. And I said the argument, all you got to do is flip it. If it's 2011, there's no contest. The game's over. It's a thrashing. Essendon don't come back. So, I think...
Great.
Yeah.
And, Reid had kicking accuracy aside, he had a pretty good game. He had 9 marks, so he was doing a good job, and I did see him pop up once or twice in defence as well, which, whilst I don't want to see him in that kind of LRT role where he plays kind of, half and half or something like that, I want him to stay forward most of the time, but, if needed, it's good to see that he can drop back and help out there as well.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And look, we get to revisit our time and fun with Jordan Lewis on the weekend as well. How I have not missed him.
Oh, that'll be fun.
Him trying to start fights and then, making out like it wasn't his fault and he's the victim. Oh, man, that guy is a tool.
Oh,
but,
yes.
I'll tell you what, I'm looking at the team list, and I think Melbourne have done pretty well recruiting-wise. This is just from the other teams that I can remember off the top of my head. They've got Hibbard, they've got Lewis, they've got Frost, they've got Bug, they've got Melksham, Stretch? Wasn't he from Geelong?
Pretty sure I'm not sure. Pretty sure he's drafted by Melbourne.
Was he? Okay. Oh, yeah, he was.
Pretty
yeah.
sure. Yeah.
Garlett, Vince, not Tyson, no.
No, Tyson, yeah, he came from Gold Coast. They traded
Gold Coast,
two
that's
for
right.
him.
And Harms? Not sure.
Oh, possibly,
but
yeah.
That's quite a few players in their first 22 who have come in from other teams. And it's improved them dramatically as well. So it's going to be a fantastic game to watch, and I'm just hopeful that we're on top. So now that we're talking about us winning, I hope you think we're going to win too.
Oh, yeah. Fingers crossed. I mean, it'll be a ripper of a game, and we should win. We should, but...
Definitely should.
I'm hesitant to say anything this season.
Yeah, I know. It's just one of those... I remember... We were both at the ground for the Richmond game, and we were both texting each other at the ground, and I think we were both pretty filthy on the performance about 6 minutes into the second quarter.
Yeah.
And then about 6 seconds after the final siren, I think that was a case of how the hell did we do that?
Yeah, it was a tale of two halves, that was.
It's incredible. And it was the great escape again on the weekend. So you're right. No game is 100%. And at the start of the year, I think we would have looked at this one and gone, this is winnable. But the way Melbourne are playing, they are up and about. So in case anyone's wondering for why Rowan's not chipping in, he unfortunately had to leave us for the night. It's pretty late. It's 11 o'clock, so we're just wrapping up ourselves really fast.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've kind of run a bit late. I've actually been doing this for 2 hours. So, okay, now we'll just go back over the good calls and bad calls from last week. Oh, the last episode, rather. Now, this is back when we had Glenn, the Richmond supporter, coming on, and he was great for the show as well. Now, his predictions, I'll just get the results 1 sec.
Oh, dear.
His
I'm
prediction,
sorry about mine.
well, he had two that didn't work at all. This is for the Richmond, so this isn't last week. This is for the weekend before. He had... I'm actually going to have to pull this one up on the AFL site, so just bear with me.
Yeah.
He had West Coast to lose. They won by 13. That was at home. So that's a big one. Now, he had Nank the Tank as best on ground.
Oh, no, that did not happen.
Oh, no, that didn't go near it. And he had Nank the Tank smashes Naismith. Not even
don't you can call that.
no. Nank the Tank got smashed by Sinclair. Oh, far out, that was funny. And I thought it was even more funny reading one of the newspaper articles where, I can't remember who wrote the article, said that Nankervis performed exactly as Swans fans expected he would.
Yeah, look, that's probably fair enough.
Oh, look, we've seen him enough times to know that around the ground he's okay, but in the air he's just... I reckon I could outjump him in the air. That's how low he gets.
Yeah, yep.
Now,
not knocking too much from him. He's had a good year.
Oh, he has, but his that game wasn't particularly good for him.
Yeah, last week he wasn't too crash on either. I think just listening on the radio.
Oh, there was another one that came out where someone suggested that Nank the Tank's out of gas.
The tank refuel.
The tank needs to be refilled. Yep. Now, how did you go that round 2 weeks ago? Did you get 0 tips?
No, I didn't. I got some right, unfortunately. But I think I did say something that no match should be decided by more than 20 points. And
no. It was by a goal or 100 points.
Oh, a goal or 100 points. Well,
yep. So your first one was going to get 0 tips right. No, obviously you got a couple.
I think I got 2.
Yep. And now let me just pull up the Carlton game. Now you had Sam Doherty to get 40 touches. Now, while I'm waiting for this to load, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that didn't happen.
Oh, he was close. I think he got more than 30. He was...
Let's have a look. Doherty got 30. So...
Oh, close.
And the Richmond game was... You settled on big blowout, and it was not a big blowout.
Not a big blowout.
Not a big blowout.
Well, it wasn't the first half.
I think you said it was going to be like 10 points or 100 points, but you settled on the big blowout.
Yeah. Oh, well, flip of a coin.
Yeah, and mine did not eventuate at all. I had Alir in for Marsh. Did his knee, so that never happened. I had Newman with 30 disposals. And I had Gold Coast by 40 points. That definitely did not happen.
Why do we do this to ourselves? I mean, honestly.
It gives us a good laugh a week later.
Yeah, true.
I'm just having a look at Newman. What did he have? I think he only had like 18 or something.
Yeah.
Oh, no, he had 26. I was so close.
Oh, close.
And he was best on ground, of course. I'm thinking of last week when he had 13. So, okay, now, finishing up for the night, let's go through our predictions for the round. So if you want to kick us off with 3 predictions.
Alrighty. Let me just go back to the games for this week. Alright, I'll start off with the less risky one than last time I did this. I'll start off by, I'll just say a Sydney win.
Really going out on a limb there.
Yeah, massive limb, but I'm not even going to give a margin. That's how kind of tentative I am on that. And now this one for a bit of a tongue-in-cheek one. Gary Ablett not to play his 300th game until, let's say, the year 2020 maybe. No, but I reckon they'll...
2020.
Oh, don't write that down. No, but I'll say Gary Ablett... I haven't heard anything. I could be saying something that's been completely proven wrong already, but I'll say Gary Ablett won't play this week.
Yep, well, he did his calf, so there's a very good chance he won't play for at least 3 more weeks.
Speaking of players not playing, Paddy McCartan had another concussion in the VFL, and also together with Angus Brayshaw, they're kind of the 2 poster boys for concussion at the moment. And my tip is that neither of them will play a game again this year.
Yeah, I think that's pretty safe.
Yeah, I think when they're both kind of not injured, I think they both have a strong case to be best 22 players, but they're so prone to that sort of injury. Unless they, I don't know, do a Caleb Daniel and put on the helmet, I think they're just... But I think there's just the AFL needs to, and medical teams of both teams need to take a look at this, because it's not something you want to see. You don't want to see guys have their careers cut short and have their post-footy lives affected by this, by all these head knocks. It's something that can really affect them, and not something you want to see.
Well, even Griffin, he goes around wearing his little hat, but he still suffers concussions, so. It doesn't protect you. It lessens your exposure, but it doesn't protect them. Yeah,
I guess my thinking is it's better than nothing. I mean, what else can they do? And we're not American football where you wear pads and all that sort of stuff, and helmets. But yeah, I mean, to be fair, I don't want to see that happen. I mean, it's Australian football, and you got to keep it Australian football. But yeah, I think the concussion has to be one of the main issues that the AFL needs to continue to look at. And my third prediction, again, this one not too risky, there'll be another game this week, at least one game this week, decided by less than a goal.
Oh, that's barely risky.
I know, but I'm pretty embarrassed by what I brought up last time, so I'll see if I can get 3 out of 3 this time.
Well, yeah, it's really interesting you raise that point about concussion, especially now with the new TPP arrangement, that there is amount of money set aside for concussion research. So I think you're right that the AFL still needs to do more to protect players. And there are too many examples in the AFL where players have had significant injuries from concussion or careers cut short. So, yeah, and Griffin from Richmond, he's a prime example of someone who's just been crippled, which is really unfortunate. And the guy can't even play anymore without having concussion. And same with Brayshaw. Brayshaw just gets a head knock, and he's out cold. So, yeah. And look, for my 3 predictions, I am saying that at least 4 games decided by less than 10 points.
Oh, yep.
Yep. Now, I am saying that the Swans win by 3 goals.
Yeah, 3 goals. Yeah, that's probably, decent prediction, yep.
Now, there's going to be I reckon there's going to be a bit of a cuddle fest in the Swans Demon game, but I am on board with Franklin for 5 or more.
Or 5 or more, yeah. You think he'll bounce back after a few quiet weeks on the scoreboard?
Oh, look, he's been hitting the scoreboard, but he's been hitting the wrong side.
Yeah, fair enough.
So, if you can straighten up those kicks, I think that's not going to be a problem at all. But look, that's it for tonight's episode. So, thank you so much, Stephen, for joining me.
Yeah, thanks, Justin, and thanks also to Rohan Connolly for joining us.
Yep, big thanks to Rohan. Unfortunately, he couldn't stick with us until the end. Now, as always, stay connected with us on social media. You can follow us using the Swanscast tag on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can also contact us directly using the Swans Blog. And also, if you'd like to get in touch with us during the week by email, you can email us at swanscast@theswansblog.com. This has been another episode of the Swans Blog Swanscast. Thank you so much for listening.